Hi, I'm Tina Martin, host of Local USA, and we are here with award-winning journalist Soledad O'Brien. Welcome, such a pleasure.
The pleasure is all mine, thank you.
So tell us about you. Where did you grow up? How did you get in journalism?
I grew up in Long Island. I'm from Strong Island. And it's actually been interesting as the conversation right now is about fair housing. My mom was a big advocate for fair housing. We were one of the very few Black families, Black/Latino families in our community. And so my mom was a very big advocate for fair housing in the 60s and 70s, which was akin to slamming your head against the wall over and over repeatedly because it was not a popular idea. And you can see how it's being leveraged now, same thing. And so my parents were an interracial couple. My mom was Black. She's from Cuba. My dad was white. He was from Australia. And I think a lot of their experiences kind of frame for me a lot of the conversations I would later have about race, because I think I grew up in a family that was very clear about race. And I have a lot of brothers and sisters, but at the same time, I was in a completely white community. So it kind of gives you this weird insider-outsider take on stories. My first job was at WBZ TV, where I worked getting a running script sometimes for Tom Bergeron. And then I started working in the newsroom and became an associate producer there. And a producer left to go to NBC to be a producer in New York. And then I went to San Francisco to start reporting and did that job for a couple of years. When MSNBC launched, I started working at MSNBC as an anchor. Then I started anchoring the Today Show on the weekends and filling in on the weekdays a bit. And then I started working at CNN in 2003 and was there for about 10 years.
And now I want to ask you, because I loved watching the Black in America series. Like my family, we would sit and just watch it, and we absolutely loved it. Tell us about that series.
It was for CNN. We started in 2008, and it was a great series. The first year it was a 6-parter, so 6 hours. And it was amazing. It was a big event. And I think it really showed the degree to which African Americans weren't even really covered, right? Because it was such a big event. People would stop me in the airports and say, I want to be on Black in America. I want to be on Being Black in America. Tell me how to get on. I mean, it was just a huge deal. And partly it was a huge deal because I don't think anybody had ever done a piece that really looked at the lives of African Americans, and not like, this is good, this is bad, but a documentary kind of examining some of the issues. It was great. It was also really hard to do because there were lots of really, icky moments. So for example, often a lot of the stories, the data points were very negative, right? Negative about crime, negative about education, negative on a lot of fronts. And I used to have to tell the producers, but think of all the Black people like this what I'm reading and what you're pitching is so depressing. And most of the Black people I know are not sorrowful and depressed. The best comedy, the best singers, the best, there's a whole bunch of amazing excellence. And not that we should be just doing a doc about excellence, which you could do, but data is not people. Stories are not about data. They're about human beings, and the data can add some explanations to it. So getting in there to try to help frame something that I truly believe, that was very important to me, but it was hard to kind of bring everybody around, frankly. And then sometimes you'd have to argue with people. So for example, we did a great story about a young woman named Glorious Menifee, a student who was trying to get into college, high school student. And I remember the producer, who was a lovely person, taking the first pass at the script. And it was something like, Glorious's mother is a crack addict and her father is an alcoholic. And I'm like, well, first, I didn't know the phrase asset framing and deficit framing back then, but I learned it afterwards. I just was like, but that's not Glorious's story. And I'm not suggesting we make up a story for this young woman. And I'm not even suggesting that we don't put this in. We should, but when you're introducing someone, they get to have their own story. And in fact, if Glorious was a young, white, suburban male, I can promise you, because I've written this story a million times, right? We would imbue him with a lot of agency. Little Jimmy Smith is 12 years old. Oh, he loves Derek Jeter. So he took on a paper route because he's hoping that he can save money to buy a mitt. And when he gets that mitt, he's going to oil that mitt right? We just imbue him with here's who this kid is and here's their story. When we talk about people, usually of color, in poverty, we kind of strip them of agency, right? And so we make them a compilation of all their deficits in their life and not the all of us want to be described by our assets, right? I mean, imagine if you're doing someone's introduction and you're like, then she messed up this, then she screwed up that. I mean, no one would go for it. So that part was hard because sometimes it felt like you were trudging uphill and people didn't necessarily want to come along with you. And you just, I mean, as an anchor person, you just feel like a jerk, every single time. I don't like to be critical, but I also thought it was really important. And it was so important, actually, that yes, we would stop down and fix it, or I wouldn't read it. So it got a little ugly at times, but it would ended up to go on to be a huge hit and did really well. We won a zillion awards for it. But, it was just a lot. It was emotionally a lot. It was just a lot to tackle because I think when it was important. It was really important.
And so I want to ask you, of course, I'm happy that you took that stance, and many of us are, but there are some people, as we know, who wouldn't have done as much as you did when it comes to framing of a story, etc. So why did you do it? Like, why did you feel like, you know what, I'm not going to just let you we're going to do something good.
I think in the Black community for a long time, right, we don't really have the luxury of just being ourselves. I kind of wish you could, that it didn't, but I think that we are forced to serve as role models, and we're forced to be, and maybe this is for all minorities or all populations that are in a minority. So for example, in my newsroom as a mom, I knew that like, if I did something momish that was not going to work out, I would literally impact all the women coming behind me who had small children, right? If I had to run out the door every day an hour early because I had to pick up my kid from somewhere and I couldn't handle my schedule, I promise you that there would have been an implication. And I think the same thing for African Americans and Latinos, right? There's a sense of there are so few of us that we actually have to make sure that we're not pulling up the bridge just by not doing this well. We have to be amazing. We have to have everybody say, we should hire another African American, or we should do that story again, or we should fund this doc again, because if you don't do a good job, or if it doesn't win, or if it's not at a super, super high caliber, it goes away. And with it then goes jobs for all these other people. So I guess I've always felt that way. I mean, I don't want to sound Pollyanna about it, but I just knew like, it's not just you really screw it up for people. And I very much felt this way about being a working mom. If you couldn't hack certain things when you're overseas, they just wouldn't send moms. No one would ever say that officially, but we'd all know.
Were you ever labeled as an angry Black woman?
My best friend, who's a producer, used to call me an angry half Black woman. Yeah, I don't know that people call me that, but I think all the other words that go with that, the B word, yeah, because, but then I didn't mind because it was doing well. And I also felt very confident. I knew it was going to come back to me, right? As you know, in these projects, everybody assumes that you shot it, you edited it, right? That you put the lights on, right? They assume that was all you. Which of course it's not. You have an amazing team. We had fantastic photographers on this project, but in terms of viewers, they assume mistakes are yours and credit is yours. And I'm a big fan of like, the credit is everybody's, but yes, the mistakes are mine. And if the mistakes are going to land on me, then it's my responsibility to make sure that I can tell you why I decided to do that thing. I always tell young journalists this too. I'm like, I'm not saying I'm not going to screw something up. I do all the time, but at least I'll look back and say, well, here was my thinking on that. Woo, I messed that up. But here was my philosophy. And this is why I made that really terrible decision versus I made a really terrible decision because Bob told me to. And I didn't push back, or I was afraid people would not like me. So I kept my mouth shut. Like, that's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. And so I always felt like, listen, things get messed up. Mistakes are made frequently. You just have to decide. Like, I don't mind mistakes, and I will stand up for my mistakes. And when I really messed it up, I will apologize for my mistakes and take full responsibility. But I'm not going to make mistakes just because I was not strong enough to stand up for the work. That's unacceptable. And that's because we don't get to do these projects very often. They're really important.
And so have you always seen yourself as a content creator?
I love storytelling. I'm pretty good at it. There are things about it that I like and things that the areas of it that I don't love. But I love trying to figure out like, how do I take this story and what platform does it live on? And now that I run a production company, we've started doing some work in scripted, which is really different for me. And usually I do documentaries or news coverage. And so scripted is, same thing, still stories, just a different kind of way of thinking about it. And I don't know it very well. So I've been working with a lot of interesting people to try to get some insight.
And that's all under Starfish.
Yes, our production company's name changed. We changed it to Soledad O'Brien Productions because people were annoyed that my name wasn't in it, which I don't know. I'm not a big fan of like sticking my name on things, and now everything has my name on it, so it's kind of weird.
It's branding though.
We have great t-shirts.
When you were at CNN, did you start Starfish at CNN or once?
I did actually. I started it right before I started about a year before I left. I knew I always wanted to run a production company. I just didn't think it would be soon. So when we were negotiating a deal and it just made more sense for me to leave, I already had a production company set up. It was a good time to go. I mean, I really loved that job, but traveling all the time was grueling, or traveling that way where you have a go bag and just land somewhere. That I found very hard after a while. I kind of missed everything for my kids. They will be just fine. But as I like to tell them, it's something to talk to your therapist about. But for example, often I was the class mom on a field trip and then I'd have to, bail out. We got to do lots of interesting things as well, but there were certain things that I missed, and there came a point where I found it actually harder when your kids are older. You actually do need to be around more. When they're littler, you sort of know where they are and what's going on in their lives and who their friends are. So I thought it was a good time for that. And also I knew I could just focus on the stories I wanted to tell.
So telling the stories you want to tell, do you think that comes with some additional freedom? Because I follow you on Twitter and you don't hesitate to take people to task if you feel like something is off.
Well, running your own company gives you the ability, as I always tell everybody, I follow the social media rules of Soledad O'Brien Productions. And yes, I knew early on that I was going to hold journalists accountable and call people out when they do. And right now we're in an era of really sometimes horrifically, horribly, terrible, bad journalism. So I'm busy.
Let's talk about Soledad O'Brien because, of course, I'm a huge fan. My students are going to be watching this. And we are as you said, it's just,
crazy times.
Yeah. But then we also have the killing of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. The names go on. And so I was talking to one of my colleagues about, yes, all these things are happening, yet these newsrooms still don't have any managers of color. They have very few reporters of color. So
the number of diverse hires has gone down over a large number. I think it's about 18% they've gone up, but twice that the amount of diversity has gone down. That's actually almost hard to do if you're picking from point. The diversity of the country's gone up. So you have to work extra hard to do that. And I think that, the media loves to call out racism or just bias in other places without necessarily talking about their own bias. I worked in a place when I was in San Francisco. We used to count the security guards in our diversity profile for the organization, right? And we had great security guards. They were Black guys, but you would have thought we had a nice, percentage-wise, nice number of Black men who were leading the newsroom. They were great people, but they wouldn't have been put in the editorial position, and they were only done to boost the numbers, to make it look better than it really was. It's just appalling.
And so when you talk about the lack of diversity in these newsrooms, how does that impact, and this is for people who are watching, for students who want to understand, how does that impact coverage of these Black Lives Matter protests and these men and women who have been killed while in police custody, et cetera?
Well, here's a good example. People will complain about the protests sometimes get violent. And I always say to them, but the media won't really cover the protests until they get violent, right? So if you want to be guaranteed now news coverage, not that I think protests should be violent, but I think media should cover nonviolent protests more, like actually go in and tell those stories far more than they do. So I think often people don't understand communities very well. Part of the reason you're around the table is to say, well, let me tell you about this neighborhood, because you just don't know. This is a neighborhood actually full of people who do care about their neighborhood. This is not a neighborhood. Who are the people who are committing these violent acts? Let's not assume it's the people in this neighborhood. one of my very first stories, I was sent out to do something on a welfare mom, and I was interviewing a woman, and the mom herself, Black woman, and she said to me, you know, most people on welfare are white, right? This is the mother herself. And I was a brand new reporter. And I was like, oh yeah, like, why did I pick her? I was in the city and it was close. She said yes. It was 15-minute drive. I could get there and still make my debt. Right? I can give you a million reasons. She was a perfectly good interview. Right? But she was telling me, you know, I'm not the face of this. Like, maybe you should try harder to find the face of this. You know, like, I'm happy to have this conversation because this is who I am and this is my life. But you are not doing a good job because I'm going to become the face of a thing that I'm actually not the face of this thing. And it really made me start thinking about, like, oh my gosh, she's 100% right. Like, I'm doing this all wrong. And you have to really think about not just the individuals, but what is the overall story that you're telling. I try to share those stories a lot and things that I got horribly wrong, because I know the media right now is not into kind of saying like, oh, we screwed this up. But I think you have to tell people, like, it's okay to screw this up. It's okay to mess it up. Just learn and move forward and understand what your mistakes are. That's all you can ask from any job.
And let me take you back to the newsroom, because you're this young Black reporter, Latino reporter, and you talk to your white editor and you explain, hey, this mom really isn't the face of welfare per the statistics. This is the face of it. What is that conversation like when the editor is not necessarily understanding you, or maybe they have a more of a commitment to the deadline, or they're not necessarily interested in your perspective, they just want a story?
Well, and the commitment to the deadline is a very big thing. I mean, I really would never, ever minimize it, because you can be brilliant, but if you're not making your deadline, nobody cares. My strategy for that young person would be not to say, I'm going to push back on this person. I never like the no without something else. I would say, so I loved your idea about Jane Doe, the Black woman, as the welfare mom in the story. But research showed me that actually, did you know that the number of people who are on welfare more in the state are overwhelmingly white? So I've also lined up two other people who I think are amazing. There's Sue Smith and Janice whatever. And I pre-interviewed them very roughly, but I think they're going to say the same thing. And I think because the data's there, we probably want to go with one of them, right? It's a little more work, but it's worth it. I would never tell my bosses, no. You know, I know you sent me out to find this person, but no, that does not work. It's got to be, I actually thought this would be better. I've already done it, and let me show you how it turned out. You know, I want to make sure that we're serving our public. So we want to make sure that this information is accurate, and also accurate in terms of data reflection as well.
Do you think it's a mindset? I have talked to so many people, so many of my students just want to be a news anchor. That's what they want to do. They just want to be a news anchor.
I never hired those people, by the way.
Yeah, they just want to be on TV. What is needed to change the mindset of, you can actually be someone who creates content that can affect change?
Yeah, and you can want to be on TV too. I just think that it's a very terrible thing to say in an interview, because very rarely is it backed up with any reason. Storytelling is storytelling, and whatever the platform is, you can learn from it. I found being a producer gave me so many more options, because later I could rely on being a producer. I love being an anchor. I still do it occasionally and consistently, and I think I've learned a lot of skills, certainly interviewing wise, presentation wise, but I think it's all part of a resume. So someone who tells me that they just want to be on camera, they might as well be telling me, you know, ugh, I hate research. I just don't want to know any facts. I just want to, you're like, okay, red flag, red flag.
Of course. Any advice for people who someday hope to be where you are?
Yeah, listen, I think in our business, hard work is a thing. And it's really rarely talked about and really rarely elevated as like something very important. I have hired people who at the end of a day have done such an amazing job of just doing the work that, you know, it pays off. And I'll tell you a great story. I had an intern once, very nice young woman, but came with a lot of like, here's what I don't do. And I almost felt like someone had this conversation with her. She said, you know, I just want you to know I don't get coffee because I just think it's demeaning. And I was like, okay. And I said, you know, and I don't write letters of recommendation. Like, what is that? Who starts a conversation with what I don't do? In places where I work, I get the coffee if I'm going, and you get the coffee if you're going. And we all get the coffee because we're not in the business of getting coffee. That's not our job. We're in the business of putting a story together. And by the way, we all work on that together too. And whoever happens to be free for the moment might be leading on that. Sometimes it's me, sometimes it's not. But I very much worry for young people when they come in with like this versus work really hard. At the end of the day, ask people, what could I have done better? How could I have been more helpful? When you really screw something up, step forward and say, I am so sorry. I just screwed it up. Don't give any excuses. Don't give any reasons, and say, I'd love to, at some point, walk through what I did wrong because I thought I was doing the right thing. But when we have time, not today, right? Which is, I care about my mistakes. I want to be better, but I'm also not going to sit here and give you, excuses. So then later when you have that meeting, you can say, so I'm just going to walk you through what I was thinking, right? It's not framed as an excuse. It's just, I went into this thinking that you had said this, not an excuse, just trying to understand. And I think when you get a little bit of distance, it actually helps you in those conversations. But also just doing the work, staying late, helping people out. When someone needs to get something printed, coffee, a script, go get it. Really, I mean, I'm always so amazed that like so much of work is just being reliable and being somebody can turn to over and over again. Just go in like, I'm happy to be here. I want to do the most I can. If I screw something up, I'm going to apologize. We're going to move forward. I think people really appreciate it, and yet people do it so rarely.
Thank you so much, award-winning journalist Soledad O'Brien. It was so fantastic to catch up with you. Thank you so much for sitting down with us.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.